Welcome everybody to the first of EdUnity's webinar series on education. My name is Lung Caesar and I am a trustee of the EdUnity Foundation, where we believe in promoting national unity through education. It has been said that education is the passport to the future, which belongs to those who prepare for it. Yet it is so much more. It is the bedrock on which strong and successful nations are built. A proper education agenda forges and consolidates a common national identity and provides the knowledge and skills to compete as a nation. This is obvious and compelling, yet we seem to have done ourselves a great disservice by neglecting some of the most basic tenets of a good education system, such as maintaining high standards of teaching and performance, the use of English as a learning tool, but most of all, national integration. I believe we once had a flourishing education system that produced great thinkers and leaders. The question today is, do we still have that system, or do we need to intervene, and intervene urgently to bring it back? These concerns will be explored in our webinar series, and I hope you enjoy each one of them. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Noel Lim on BFM 89.9. Welcome to this webinar, Our Education System Challenges and Solutions. This is the first of an education series brought to you by BFM, EdUnity Foundation and Unify Malaysia. Now, without further delay, allow me to introduce the panel that we have today. Datin, Azimah, Rahim, the chairman of PAGE, Parent Action Group for Education. Hi, Azimah.
Hello, how are you now?
Yes. Our next panelist is Chan Soon Sing, the CEO of Teach for Malaysia. Welcome, Soon Sing. Hello.
Hi, it's good to be here.
And finally, Nina Adlan Disney, Executive Director at Leap Ed. Hello, Nina.
Hi, everyone.
Yeah, I'm glad we're all in red today.
Yes. Raring to go in red.
Yes, great. So as you are tuning in as a member of the audience, I look forward to your participation as well. Do submit your questions and comments. Thank you so much. Now, let's just get started. According to the PISA, Program for International Students Assessment, or by OECD, shows that Malaysia is still very low down the rankings amongst 77 countries. For example, in terms of reading scores, Malaysia is ranked number 56 out of 77 countries, just below Jordan. So I really like to pose this question to you. Maybe we can start with Nina. What has been the progress of improving our education system?
Well, I think there has been a lot of good intentions, right? I think this has been kind of epitomized by the Malaysia Education Blueprint, which was issued in 2013, known as the MEB. Yeah, so MEB 2013 to 2025 provides a very comprehensive roadmap in terms of the actions that we need to take to improve the system. So it is a fantastic document, but like a lot of policy documents in Malaysia, I think where we fall down on is in terms of the implementation. So those are really some of the key issues that we need to look at. What have been the barriers to implementation? During the course of this series and, well, during the course of this session, I would like to explore in terms of 5 key themes: students and systems, cash and culture, capacity and caliber, Fourth would be autonomy and authenticity. And fifth would be data and development. So that's how I would frame the discussion based on our experience in LEAPED in implementing 94 trust schools around Malaysia.
Thank you, and we'll get to the details soon. Soon Seng, from your perspective as a Teach for Malaysia, heading up the organization, where do you feel, how are we progressing?
Yeah, and so I just to concur with Nina around the blueprint, right? And so Noel, you talked about our 2018 PISA results. So in the Malaysian education blueprint, our aspiration was that we would rank in the top third of the PISA rankings. And upon publishing the blueprint, Malaysia sat in the bottom third of the PISA rankings. But these 2018 results show us in the middle third. So we have progressed. We have come out of the bottom third. We're in the middle third, but still below the overall OECD. The overall OECD average. And I guess the question remains with well, really three and a half years left to the blueprint, and the next PISA assessment round coming up this or next year, will we then ascend to the top third? And so I think that's the big question. So have we really done enough? We're in the middle third, but really at the lower part of the middle third. So like Nina said, we have this document that lays out progress, and we have been making incremental progress towards the aspirations of the blueprint. But the question I think that which you can answer is, are we making enough? Is it fast enough? And I think that there are gaps and between our aspirations and the reality that we have now. I think that from Teach for Malaysia's perspective, we really believe that it is leadership and talent that make magic happen in the education system. And there's this quote from a McKinsey report that the quality of an education system cannot exceed the quality of its teachers, which is basically saying that it's teachers that make the biggest difference in a system. And and I think that's really where I'd come in and focus around, like, what do we need to do to empower our teachers? We have over 420,000 teachers in Malaysia, and what needs to be done to empower these teachers? There are so many great bright lights that are out there, but oftentimes their potential is hindered, and there's so much more that we can do to invest in our teachers to really transform the system.
Azimah, are we moving fast enough from the perspective?
Well, when everybody has everything to say about the education system because everyone went to school, and no one is really happy about the way things are going. So just to give you an overview of how bad we were at some point, quoting from the Malaysia Education Blueprint, or MEB 2013-2025, taking some figures from the chapter on teachers, it says here that quality of teaching, 50% of lessons were observed to be delivered unsatisfactorily, which is really appalling. 12% only was of a high standard, whilst 38% was satisfactory. And then it goes on, whereby you have the school inspectorate, which inspects schools randomly. And the school inspectorate says that while schools themselves, 63% of schools rate themselves as excellent or good, the school inspectorate themselves rate these schools that are good and excellent are only 13%. So see the vast difference between the two. And then the other stark figure is that teachers only spend between 2.4 to 2.9 hours a day teaching in the classroom. just to give an idea as a comparison, Singapore does 3.8 hours a day. Indonesia does 4.5 to 5 hours a day, whilst New Zealand does 5 hours a day. So on average, we are actually 40% lower than OECD countries. So I think since then, we've been watching our TIMSS and PISA rankings, and it's still it appears to be on the rise, but as Sun Sen says, it's much to be desired.
Yeah, so I've been trying to see some reports on the progress of the Malaysian education blueprint, because some of the numbers that you quoted were at a time when Malaysia was really struggling with the system. So I'm trying to get a sense now, have we at least made some progress? Yes, PISA has showed that we've moved up to that sort of closer to the middle quartile, but have we really improved? Perhaps Nina would like to take this question,
Okay.
since you work very closely with the public schools.
Yes. So we've worked with 94 schools over the past 10 years, and the Trust School Initiative was actually launched even before the blueprint, but is very much part of that, the aspiration of the blueprint. So what I would say, speaking from the perspective of Trust Schools, is that yes, there are pockets of excellence. There really are pockets of excellence. Like Sun Seng said, there are some brilliant teachers within the system, but it's so sad that we've had to uncover them because, as Sun Seng says, they're very often hindered by the culture. So that goes to my point about, is it cash or is it culture? To me, it isn't cash, Noel, because we already spend, the lion's share of our budget this year. I think 50 billion goes to education. If we look at education expenditure as a percentage of GDP, Malaysia is on a par with OECD countries, right? And in fact, on par with some high-income nations. So it's not about cash; it's about optimizing what is already there. We are not optimizing. We are not leveraging on the strengths. We are kind of in a complacent mode where people are just doing things the way that they've always been done, and they are highly resistant to change, which is, the culture part. If you can change culture, you can move mountains. And of course, it's easier said than done, but our experience in the Trust School shows that it can be done because there are people out there with the right mindset, with the right culture, but it's not the dominant culture. So it's about, how do you grow people? How do you encourage schools to improve their capacity? Yeah, so if you have the right, that goes to the point of caliber and capacity, right? If you have the right caliber people and you build on that capacity, you can change the culture. But it's easier said than done, but it can be done.
Well, in the business world,
let me just add, in that spending, the 50 billion, 80%, in excess of 80% goes on emoluments. So that kind of tells us where we should be focusing our efforts, right? We need to rally the 420,000 to get the return, that ROI on our investment.
Culture eats strategy for breakfast in the business world, and I'm guessing that it also applies to the education sector. You can have the best plan, but culture will just kill everything. So maybe Sun Seng, could you tell us, from your experience, what needs to change in terms of culture or mindset? That's the word we tend to use in our ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that as anyone who's gone through an education system, what we need to look at is what gets how and what gets measured at the end of the day. And when we think about one of the challenges of the Malaysian education system, what we often look at when we measure students, and I'll bring this point back to teachers and organizational school leadership culture. But when we look at students, what are we truly trying to measure with students? Oftentimes, we're very focused on the academic the academic qualifications and the results that they get, right? So the intellectual knowledge. But what we don't holistically assess for when we think about students' assessment is that we're not actually holistically assessing the full broad range of skills that we believe and that our national education philosophy espouses, that our education system is supposed to develop. So there's often this issue with qualifications or paper outcomes versus actual competency. And so I think a huge challenge when it comes to culture is that we look for sort of these sort of paper qualifications instead of valuing the competencies that we want to see happen. And so I'll give you an example, right? So I, before I came into my position as CEO of the organization, almost 10 years ago now, I was a teacher in the Teach from Malaysia program, and that's how I started off my career in education. And when I was assessed as a teacher, a huge part of my assessment as a teacher was the effectiveness of my administration. That meant like, were my files like effectively filed, and oftentimes I was oftentimes trying to get people to focus on like look at what's happening in my classroom and give me some feedback about what's happening in my classroom and help me improve my pedagogical competencies. But often we look at these things like filing administration because that's what gets measured. And so the school administration, a school principal, a huge part of what they're measured on is the administrative effectiveness of their leadership instead of their instructional leadership. So their leadership in improving and driving the quality of learning in the classroom. So the ministry is trying to make that shift, but this culture is so embedded in the ministry. And I think a last thing that I'd sort of touch on, which Nina talked about in her 5 points, is really a challenge that we see. So what Teach for Malaysia tries to do is we try to bring in young, talented, passionate young people and put them into some of the most high need schools in the country. And oftentimes what happens is we bring in these people that really want to make change and sort of shake things up. But you go into a culture and into a system where you're actually used to doing things a certain way and rewarded to do things that certain way, and you're not rewarded to change. And so I think that leadership to challenge the status quo is something that is not a culture that is seen oftentimes in the Ministry of Education, and if you think more broadly, just generally in civil service, the ability to question, the ability to do something different.
Yeah, Azimah, I know you've been really championing this teaching of English, for example, math and science. You've had countless meetings with the government and whoever was willing to listen to you. What's your sense? What do you think can be a catalyst for change in culture in Malaysia, not just education ministry, but just as a whole?
I think we've seen some improvement as far as the English language is concerned. Before, they would say, no, it's about colonialism, and then, you're a Malaysian, you must speak Bahasa Melayu. But over the years, I think parents, especially rural parents, have begun to realize that English is actually quite important as far as jobs are concerned. They want parents in the rural areas want their children to learn English. And in fact, there was a time when anybody mentioned colonialism, I said, I think you have to think forward, and I think that argument has been thrown out the door. But of course, the usual argument is, why South Korea can do it, Japan can do it, China can do it. But they are different. There are countries which are very different from us. We are a small nation. We are a young nation, And we are a trading nation. So we are not like Indonesia, where we can survive just trading among each other. We need to go out. So until and unless we you know learn the English, or even Mandarin for that matter, will always be lagging behind.
I would like to invite the audience to post your questions as well as comments. And we do have a question here. What can we do to help with the current learning loss while catering for future education progress? How do we fix what has happened in the past 2 years due to COVID while keeping our eyes on progressive targets? What can we do to fix what has happened in the past 2 years? And perhaps we start with Nina.
Okay, I think number one, we need to have a recovery plan. But that recovery plan cannot be so prescriptive. It can't just be another manual that the MOE issues with lots and lots of kind of words in it and no action. So the recovery plan must be very customized and bespoke to the specific school and community. And this is another kind of systemic problem in our system. Everything is so centralized. All the policies are so kind of centralized. Everything is driven from the center and goes out as directives and, arahan and saya yang mengikut perintah, right? So in order to really recover from these learning losses, we need to have schools and teachers who are able to assess the learning needs of the individual. It has to go down back to the individual students. And therefore, they need to be very skilled in pedagogy like differentiation, where you can differentiate. So the analogy I always use is, if you're inviting people over for dinner, yes, you can give them a set menu and everybody eats the same. But if you want to take into account their dietary, religious, whatever considerations, it would be better to have a buffet, right? So that people can eat and pick according to their need. But in our system, we're not very good at differentiation. Everything is here, everyone do this, everyone follow. The other thing that we need to be able to be good at to recover from this is assessment for learning. We need to be able to assess progress. We need to be able to assess what interventions need to be implemented. And that goes back to my data point, my point about data and development. We're not very data driven. We're not looking at baseline data. We're not measuring assessment for learning. We're very good at assessment of learning, i.e. the kind of summative assessment at the end, how many A's have you got at SPM, but we're not very good at actually checking on a progressive basis, what are the interventions required? So so it has to be, there needs to be a recovery plan, but it needs to be very not prescriptive, and we need to be very skilled, again, at the implementation. Otherwise, the rhetoric will never become reality.
And Nina, I just want to follow up on this. Just give me a second. So there is a question from a listener. Teachers are hindered in terms of workload and culture. So to your point, Nina, how can, what can we do, or how can we help teachers do that differentiation that you talk about?
I think it is about providing that support and demonstration and application. Yeah, again, that's not what we're not very good at teacher development. Okay, we put them in schools, and then, like Seng says, they're assessed, but it becomes a very tick box kind of exercise. Our teacher appraisal in general is not developmental, it's judgmental, and it's high stakes. And if you don't meet X number, then you get put on a plan. And people in general, principals don't like to do that, right? Because it affects their promotion prospects and it creates more work for them, blah, blah, blah. So that's the point about authenticity that I said earlier, right? We need authentic assessment of our teachers, and we need developmental capacity building, a safe space for them to grow and develop, to try out new things. Yeah, it is about application and not just about theory and then being assessed on a judgmental basis.
And Sun Sing, this thing about living with COVID-19, I think it's something we just have to bear with for the next 1-2 years, and we may have lockdowns periodically. So I think teachers will have to adapt to this new situation. So I'm very curious to learn how your fellows have been coping in this current pandemic to ensure none of their students are being left behind and doing all that differentiation, customization that Nina speaks about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll speak to that first, and then I'll also go back to talking about how we address learning loss moving forward. I think that our it is a difficult situation for any teacher at this point in time, and we see some of the best teachers really struggling and burning out at this point in time because they really need to go above and beyond in order to reach out to as many of their kids as possible. And even then, more often than not, teachers aren't able to reach out to all of their kids in this current school closure environment. But I think that going back to this differentiation piece that Nina's been talking about, what we've needed to train our fellows and our teachers around is actually, you can't have a one-size-fits-all distance learning strategy. Not all of your kids are going to have devices, and some of them and there's going to be a range. So we've trained our fellows to think about what are high-tech solutions, medium-tech solutions, low-tech solutions, and also the fourth one, which we call like just zero-tech solutions, right? So how do you then reach out to your kids across all of these things? And I think that the reality is that even with the understanding of how to do all of those things, it is still very challenging to reach out to every single student. And what teachers lack is the resource to be able to do that at this point in time. And we see the most committed teachers, Teach for Malaysia fellows, but there are many teachers in the system. The most committed teachers buying their own devices, paying for their internet connections, setting up home studios, putting a green screen behind so that they can make their background more interactive, purchasing online platforms for their kids. But the money that they're spending is their personal money. It comes out of their salary. And maybe if you're a young teacher who's single and you don't have a family yet, you could potentially afford to do that. But if you have to pay for your family's needs, if you have kids, you may be less willing to do that for very plausible reasons, right? So I would say that there needs to be support for teachers, right? Teachers need the support to understand different strategies that they can implement, but also resources to implement those strategies. So when we think about moving forward, what do we need, right? And so I think she's absolutely right in saying that we need to understand where our students' needs are right now. What we've seen happen in the pandemic, some of the complaints we've heard from students is that teachers kind of just send them like 10 pages of homework that they have to do without the guidance and instruction that's needed, because teachers are pressured to finish the syllabus. And it's a requirement, it's a legal requirement, it's a professional requirement for teachers to finish the syllabus, and if they don't, they can get in trouble for that. So they do it, right? But we need a relaxation of that. And we need teachers to be able to teach to the needs of their students. So the first is empowering teachers to be able to meet the needs of their students and removing the restrictions that teachers currently already face. The second is we need to resource our teachers. So and Nina will know how to speak around like how schools and districts can better utilize their budgets more efficiently, but we need to put resources into the hands of teachers. But even beyond resourcing teachers, we need to consider additional supports beyond just the teaching force. And this is where the MOE really needs to think about how do we involve the community? How do we involve society? How do we involve partnerships with NGOs to bring in the additional resources to support teachers to meet the differing needs and the remediation needs of their students? So the UK, for example, has invested over £1 billion in tutoring, for which come as additional supports to the schools. Controversial, but it's a lot of money that they've invested to support teachers. So there needs to be a relaxation and an empowerment for teachers to be able to
teach to the needs of their students, not to what the syllabus requires. And then there needs to be the resources that enable the teachers and also come alongside teachers to help them to remediate and help their students address learning loss. I think last thing that I'll say is that we also seriously need to consider the mental health and well-being of students, especially as they return to school. We need to create spaces for them to process the challenges and the trauma that they've experienced during this time, and we need to skill teachers to be able to do that.
Yes, so I have a question here from the audience. Can the panelists comment candidly about how ethnic politics has ruined the system? Perhaps Azimah, you'd like to take on this question?
Okay.
How
well,
ethnic politics has ruined the system?
Well, we know that once national schools before, we were all in national schools before, and then when Bahasa Melayu became the main medium of instruction, that's when the vernacular schools started to rise, and English medium schools closed. And now, because of that, we see schools being race-based, even though the Chinese schools claim that they are most mixed. But this is no good, I suppose. We need to make national schools the first choice for all parents. And the only way to do that is to ensure that quality of education is returned to national schools, and let parents make their choice. Right now, there's actually no choice. You're a Malay, you go to national school, which has now actually become a Malay school, and then Chinese, Indian. So we have to find a way to bring these children together. And private schools is not the answer either.
Yeah. And if I could add, Noel, we've added another level of polarization, that's economic polarization, because those who can afford it have left the system altogether to go to private international schools, right? So, yeah, we have a very fractured system, but I agree with Azimah. I think that, whatever the past is past, we can't kind of force everyone into a system. It has to be a choice, and therefore we have to make national schools as schools of choice by improving.
In fact, when international schools were liberalized, I think the idea of the ministry was that it would create competition with national schools. But instead, I think what's happened is that it's actually aided the brain drain, which has now become uncontrollable. And that's a great
Teachers have left the public schools and
children have left the country.
Yeah.
And it's very sad, because parents have to say goodbye to the children. They don't know when they're coming back again.
And that's the point I want to raise here. The racial diversity that we have in Malaysia is so precious. It almost feels that, that's something we can forge our own education DNA and offer to the world best practices in integrating different races, right? So what more could we be doing to bring up this sense of unity when schools are becoming more mono-ethnic and even separated by income? Well, we are trying to transform public schools. That's going to take a while. But what can we do in the meantime right now to just kind of foster that sense of unity? And I really bring this question because we're heading towards Merdeka on 31st August.
Okay, I'll answer that. I was in the National Education Council up to last year, and we sat in the council. There were 7 of us, and we sat in the council for 2 years, and we sat almost 100 times, to come up with recommendations for the minister then. And in the end, during our period, we had 3 education ministers. And I know it's a record, I think. And then there were 5 areas that we looked at, and I think if we were to focus on these 5 areas, I think we will be able to bring back national schools as the first choice. And one of them, leading the 5 areas was English language, and everybody knows what needs to be done. Pendidikan Islam, how can we make pendidik Islam less, I don't know, less worrying for non-Muslim parents? You know, how can we do that? Maybe by reducing the number of hours. Actually, the Education Act only suggests, I think, 2 or 4 periods a week, but now we're doing something like 11 periods a week. You know, so we can just do the minimum and then the rest do after school. That's possible because the Act actually allows the minister to do that. And then look at private partnerships. You know, how can we bring the private sector into education? Have a proper delivery unit so that, you know, these initiatives can be studied and implemented into the education system. Teachers, let's think about making teachers professionals. You know, like doctors, engineers, lawyers. You know, have a professional body to oversee them. You know, make sure, look at working conditions, look at pay, look at remuneration, the works. You know, and see how we can raise the standard of teachers. And of course, last of all, special education needs. How can we make special education teachers of a higher caliber so that so that we can implement in full force the zero reject policy? And I think these are important. And I think to the new minister, whoever he is that's coming in, please look at our recommendations instead of setting up another new MPPK and sitting for 2 years, and we'll probably come up with the same thing. So let's just study these recommendations and let's move on.
Yeah. Totally agree with Datin Azimah there. You know, the solutions, Noel, are there. If you only care to look, it's not rocket science. Yes, it isn't easy to implement because you have huge culture and mindset issues, but the solutions are there. And at the risk of sounding as if I'm banging my own drum, once again, trust schools have proven that it can happen, it can work. And as a result, you know, many of our trust schools have become oversubscribed, and you know, we have managed to win back some of the non-Malays in the communities that we're in, because you know, they see real change happening. So the culture issue here, Noel, I mean, Azimah mentioned about private sector. What we do, what TFM does, is essentially public-private partnership. But one of the culture blocks for the MOE is having quote-unquote outsiders come into their territory, which is very sad because we're here to help. We're not commercial. Yeah, we are social enterprises coming in with a genuine passion and desire to help. And so as a gardener, you should have a growth mindset, right? So if you see flourishing parts in your garden, surely you would want to go and learn and say, oh, what did you do? But instead of wanting to learn, they don't want to learn, and sometimes even worse, they go and trample on that garden because they don't like that an outsider has managed to succeed in their garden, right? And just to carry on the gardening analogy, part of the problem, if you look at the MEB, lots of initiatives, lots of plants have been planted in this garden. But then whenever it doesn't work, you chabut, throw away, plant in something else. But nobody's looking at the soil. Well, that's the culture, that's the capacity, that's the autonomy, that's the empowerment, all those things that take time, and you need to work on the soil, otherwise nothing will grow.
So Lead Ed has about 100 schools under 100, about 94 trust schools.
94 trust schools, yeah.
94 trust schools, but we have 10,000 schools.
Exactly.
How can we scale this model faster? Is there a way to bring down the cost so that we can really scale it up faster? I mean, what are some models, lower cost models that you are exploring?
Yes, we have explored all of this. And, you know, to the credit of the ministry, they did take on, we did assist them initially in this initiative called TS25. Right, so the TS25 was kind of loosely based on the trust school model, and the aim is to have every single school a TS25 school by 2025. Issue with that is, okay, you might take a recipe and then you cook it, but then if you change the ingredients, Noel, or you don't, you know, you buy Jamie Oliver's cookbook, but you don't want to watch his videos, right? And then you go off and you modify the recipe, and then it doesn't turn out as good, right? So is it the recipe's fault, or so what I would say is, in the change that we want to see, let's work together, right? Let's not let's set aside egos. Let's look at what's worked, what hasn't worked, and work on that, instead of trying to constantly reinvent the wheel and have this massive kind of mindset that, oh, this is your initiative, this is my initiative, whatever. That's part of the culture issue.
And very much of the culture is about funding, and you raised this point earlier about cash and culture, and I couldn't help myself but think the third word was corruption, but I'll just leave it as that. I think, Seng, if I could ask this question, how can funding be better mobilized to kind of enable the teachers to do their work, or even school principals as well? The teachers are bearing the brunt of it, but I think school principals do play a very key role in this change management process. So how can funding be better mobilized from your point of view, your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think Nina would be the better person to speak on this from a school budget perspective. But from an overview, like principles, I think there's a couple of things around it. Really understanding the capacity or the remit that schools have to maximize their budget is something that is missing in schools. And then how that also gets allocated. So I'll give you an example. I loved the school that I taught in. I had an extremely supportive leadership and extremely supportive school. So I don't want to sound like I'm bashing on it, but when I was a teacher, I used to print worksheets for my students out of my own pocket. But in the school, we had a massive machine to create worksheets. They're called like Rezo machines, and those were exclusively for the printing of examination papers. So as a teacher, if I wanted to print worksheets for classroom usage, I couldn't do that. And so it's two bits. I think there is a capacity piece about school leaders and district leaders also understanding how to leverage their budgets. There also does need to be more from the system that enables more empowerment at the district and school level. But there's also, what do you truly prioritize? And how are you being really accountable for the expenditure that does happen, and that money is being put to the best use and to the outcomes that you truly want to see. But
absolutely. Nina, if I can just add to that, absolutely, Noel. It's about leveraging on a budget, having the capacity and basic financial management to be able to use that budget wisely and to prioritize teaching and learning, right? Let's never run away from the fact that students should be at the center of everything that we do. But I know it sounds blindingly obvious, but sometimes it isn't, Noel. When you go into a school, students are not at the center, so many other considerations. So teaching and learning has to be placed at the center. The leaders in the school, pengetua and the SLT, have to become leaders of learning, not sit in an office and do admin. We need to give autonomy, but only when there's capacity. There's no point just giving schools freedom to spend on whatever they want without giving them the capacity. So that's something that we do in trust schools. The peruntukan, the budget goes directly to the school, but with a financial advisor from LIPED to build the capacity of the leaders and the admin, the finance person in a school, who very often has zero financial qualifications or experience. They are clerical, and yet they are supposed to, be in charge of the budget. So that's where the efficiencies we can build on. There's a lot of budget already there that we're not optimizing.
Yeah, so I would like to invite the audience to send in your questions and comments. Do keep them rolling. So I just want to move on to this thing about exam orientation. And this is really a worldwide debate. It's not just a thing that Malaysia is discussing, but it's just even Singapore is trying to find that happy balance. So now that we have scrapped UPSR, I have to say, to be honest, I'm quite horrified by the decision, because I think taking exams is a way to track our learning and to improve ourselves. So how do we ensure now children can competently move to high school or to move on to the following year? And Azimah, I mean, as a mother, I mean, how do you feel about this?
I think I think the ministry is trying to go back to what the thinking has been to build a holistic student.
Yeah.
So which is why they're moving away from all these examinations. But then if you see what's happening in say step 5, step 6, kids are drilled.
Yeah. They're not learning.
And then they memorize answers to questions, and then drill. Then they have weekend drilling sessions and evening drilling sessions, night drilling sessions, and then at the end of it, after exams, what you learn, don't know.
Yeah.
And teachers teach to the test. You say
Exactly.
this is what's going to come out. This is these are tips. So you learn only this. You don't need to learn anything else. And then just memorize this essay, and then you just answer. Just omit what you memorize. And you will get your 5 A's. So this teaching to the test is something what the ministry is trying to get out. And it's very stressful because for parents as well as the children, when it's towards the end of the year, when it's UPSR, and I think it's very bad. And I think these two teachers down here will agree with me.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
How are you preparing your children to move high school?
It's okay.
How are you preparing your children?
It's okay. It's all right.
The focus is to be on the learning, Noel, not on the exam results, right? We're not very good. This goes back to the AFL versus the AOL, right? Assessment of learning is the drill and kill. Okay, you've got 10 A's. That's the evidence of your learning. But is it? It's not evidence of learning. It's evidence of being able to pass 10 exams and get A's. And we're not going to be competitive globally, Noel, because, we have lots and lots. We can churn them out, all these A students, but they're not globally competitive. If I can just share an example, everyone looks to Finland, and we did actually have an advisor from Finland working in our Kimana schools, and he always said, look, you have to focus on the learning, not on the test. They said in Finland, they made the changes, they increased the competencies of their teachers and invested in that. And they suddenly, it came as a surprise to them when they came top of the PISA test. They did not teach to the PISA test, but all the changes that they made had a knock-on effect on that academic, on that ability to do well.
It's the problem solving and the critical thinking which comes alive from all these interactions with students and teachers. It's not memory.
Yeah. So it's about collaborative learning, working in groups, having the confidence to speak up, to be able to differentiate between that's a good argument, that's a rubbish argument. That's what we lack, actually, Noel, not a string of A's.
No, I think what might be missing from the picture is that taking away UPSR doesn't mean that we're abolishing assessment entirely. And I think that what's lacking is that there isn't enough public awareness because there hasn't been enough done to educate the public about what assessment looks like without just an examination. But there are many alternative forms of assessment that are a lot more meaningful and that can show real skill that we are not necessarily aware of. And I think that this is where the conversation between community and school, between parents and teachers, needs to strengthen. And this is where parents then need to really rely on a teacher to be able to articulate to them the learning of their students, how effective and their progress at this point in time. And so that's something that needs to be bridged because oftentimes the relationship seems at odds, right? I'm a teacher and I'm afraid to talk to a parent and I kind of try and avoid them. But actually, parents and teachers are in a partnership, and that's what needs to change. And I think that actually removing the exams, this is when parents can now step up and be asking their teachers, well, what is my child learning in
what
school
is the
today?
progress?
That's why the tuition business is $1 million business.
Yes, exactly.
We just
from standard 1. And by standard 6, the parents are so poor already.
So we have a question from the audience. Do you think that the students whose education has been disrupted by the pandemic should be allowed to stay back and repeat their school year, but at no extra cost to parents?
Oh, can I? I'm very I'm very against this. I think that all the literature and recommendations from international agencies would recommend against it. I think that what we really need to think about is not how are we just getting kids back to where they were before, but what do kids need moving forward in the future, and how do we set them up for that? And that's why I was saying we need to reassess and think about, you know, the kind of curriculum and things that we want kids to achieve. The reality is we're not one more year of school is not going to get them back on track, and there's too much financial cost on the government that will be extremely inefficient and is not going to get us the ROI that we really need on it. So where we then need to spend all of that money that we're going to spend having kids back in school again for another year, we need to spend that money on teacher support. We need to spend that money on the resources that students need right now, instead of creating another year for students to stay back.
Yeah, it's another one-size-fits-all remedy, right? That's not going to work.
I think this is the time when the children go back to school. This is the time when, well, the ministry should be ready already with something new, the new normal. What is the new curriculum that you want to give our children? It's not going to be back to what it was before. So we have to find a way, well, they have to find a way to cut out the fat, trim it down, make it lean, and just give what is necessary to the students and forget about what it was before. And I think we should take advantage of this lost learning or this pandemic to be better than we were ever before.
I have this question here. BFM hosted a former Finnish education minister, and the first thing he said in his talk was that to change education, you need to change the culture of the country. We're not talking about just the culture of the civil servants, we're talking about the culture of the country. And that statement just really stuck in my head when he said that. So citizens have to collectively pressure politicians to prioritize education and not mess with it, not just put some yes men in there or yes woman. So how can we strongly mobilize this collective voice in Malaysia and maybe even rewrite that social contract we have with politicians so that they really put the best person in charge? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think this ministers of education, when they come in, they want to leave a legacy. So they will launch something and then hope that the next minister will carry on with what he launched. But it's not going to happen because the next minister of education will have something else on his mind. That's why we're so messed up. You know? Yeah. So I mean, for instance, the dual language program, that was a minister's baby, and then well, even before that we had science, maths, and English, right? And then this minister comes in and abolishes that one and starts his own, and then now he starts his own, and now the next minister comes in, he wants to have something else and forget about this thing, so there's no desire to change for the sake of the children. Everybody wants to leave something behind. And why they are afraid to change because teachers is a very important vote bank. So when you're always pleasing the teachers, we're not going to get very far. We're just going around circles.
So this goes back to the point, right, about you have to have a culture that values the right things. And as I said, it seems blindingly obvious, but students have to come first. You have to put students at the center, not your political career or your political legacy. And on the point of runway that Azimah mentioned, it's not just the ministers, even your senior civil servants have an incredibly short runway. The current DG has just been appointed. She's only got 1 year. What can you realistically achieve in 1 year? The previous DG came in, very capable, competent woman, Dr. Habibah. I think she'll be on one of the series, but she only just had over 1.5 years, and then she came in during the time of the pandemic. So that's part of the systemic how we promote, and it's the same in schools as well, right? You have very high turnover, you have principals and people in the PPDs and JPN, some very good people, but then they have a very short runway. So these are some of the things, systemic issues that we need to address.
Why do they have such a short runway? Is this because they're close to retirement, or it's just the nature of the
Yes.
contract?
Yeah,
with the agent?
they're close to retirement, and the way that the promotion works is, you have to wait your turn. It's very bureaucratic. Yes, I'm saying? You wanted to say?
Yeah, it
I
typically
mean, you would
takes
never have a
25
30-year-old
years.
principals. You would never have a 30,
Yeah.
someone like Seng couldn't be a principal in a Malaysian school because he's too young.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I have this one last question. So a new education minister will be announced soon, hopefully by tomorrow or maybe later tonight. What is that one thing he or she needs to accomplish before the next general elections in 2023? That one thing. If you can just do one thing, please do it in the next 2 years. Just get it done and really leave something that it will set the next generation on the right path. Sun Sing, would you want to have a stab at this?
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this is, I think Nina's alluded to this a lot as well. I think that how we're going to move forward is to move forward together. I think that that's the best way forward, right? And so really, if there's one thing that a minister of education can do that's really going to make a difference, is open up the doors of the ministry, work with the civil society organizations, work with the communities, work with the parents, and that's really what I think can make such a huge difference. And Teach from Malaysia, LEAPED, we want to do more. We will do, and we're willing to do more. And we have corporate partners and supporters that want to do more, but we're often held back by the aspirations of what the ministry has for partnerships. So that's the number one thing that I'd say: open up the ministry to partnerships.
Yeah, and
Azimah?
that's
Nina.
Well, no,
Yeah, definitely.
One from Sun Seng, because that's exactly what I would say. From a self-interested perspective, let's look at trust schools, for example. Look at these pockets of excellence that we have managed to achieve within the system without any extra money from the ministry, by the way, right? Because it's all corporate sponsorship. So the sponsors are there, but they also have to see that the MOE are willing and open to that change. Unfortunately, at the moment, a lot of CSR funding is being diverted to more quote unquote urgent needs, with food and health and all the rest of it. But we have a ticking time bomb, Noel, with education. If we don't address it now, the results and impact are going to be just as severe as our economic and social and health impacts.
Azimah, what's that one thing this Minister of
Totally.
Education needs to get
It has to be teachers, it has to be teacher training, it has to be what the MPP has recommended. Make teachers professionals and reward them for having high standards of teaching, and have a delivery unit in the ministry where all these initiatives for teachers can be looked at seriously and considered. I think the private sector is ever willing to help. They're not even asking money. In fact, they're giving away money. So and that's what the ministry is short of. So let's look at this again. Forget about reinventing the wheel. There's so much that the private sector wants to give the ministry, and I think they should always remember that the only way you're going to help the student is by ensuring that the teachers are of quality.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I think we can agree that Malaysia, it's going to take an entire country and a political system to properly educate a child, to produce the thinkers and the leaders that we so need. Thank you so much for your time, Azimah, Sun Sing, and Nina. And everyone who is tuning into this session, it's been a pleasure for me to be here with you. So do look out for our next session on September 9th. That will be with Dr. Sri Idris Jala of Pemandu Associates, Chen Lee Kai, Senior Partner at McKinsey & Co. on the Malaysian Education Blueprint. So have a good evening. Take care, stay safe, and Selamat Hari Raya Merdeka. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Take care, everyone.